Hello, and welcome to Esoterica and Nonsense, a podcast where we discuss myths, legends, folk tales, fairy tales, supernatural phenomenon, and religions from around the world. I am your host, Annabelle. You know what it is. It's basically story time. It's basically me going on deep dives on the internet to learn about some old, ancient shit that we've all forgotten. And I research it so you don't have to. It's 2025, baby. I'm recording this on January 1st, 2025, and I'm amped. I feel so excited. I feel so excited about life, and I just feel a resurgence of inspiration and admiration. And I really just think about the legacy of human beings that have contributed to humanity through creativity, art, and that's what I want to do. I want to create things. That's the part of humanity I'm most proud of, and that's the part of me that I want to really focus on in my life. And I just feel really inspired to do it, and I just have so much love and gratitude for this beautiful planet that we live on, planet Earth as we call it. And yes, so happy to be here. Happy New Year's, everyone. Also a reminder, I had a headache for almost 2 days. I never get headaches. I was very confused. I was drinking plenty of water, but I realized it was an electrolyte issue. So I just put a little bit of pink Himalayan salt in my water, and it completely cured my headache. Everything's fine. So this is your reminder to make sure you're getting your electrolytes, please and thank you. Also, I have my window open because I'm here living in the Yucatan, and the sun is setting and it's easily 80 degrees right now, and it's just with the window closed, it's unbearable, and I can't really have the fan on while I record. So let's hope that the peppers outside don't bark too much during recording, or else we're gonna be hotboxing Sage and sweating our little booties off. But anyway, let's stop dilly-dallying. Let's get to the meat of this. This is going to be a doozy, everyone. I'm warning you now. This is going to be a doozy. If you didn't listen to the previous episode, which was about gateway experiences and the holographic theory, I mention a phenomenon that happened in France in the 1700s about a man named François de Paris, and he was a member of a sect of Christianity called Jansenism. I was actually calling it Jansenism. I actually didn't know the pronunciation, and I assumed it was pronounced Jansenism simply because it was originated in Holland. It was Dutch, and I don't know. There's like the name Johann and like the last name Johansson. I guess that is a J, but they often say Johansson or Johannesburg or like whatever. I don't know. So I just assumed it was Jansenism, but I finally looked it up on how to pronounce it, and I was incorrect. So strike that from the record. Pepper was wrong. And apparently in English you say Jansenism, and in French it's Jansenisme. So I'm just gonna say Jansenism. That's like the best we can do with my crude American peasant accent. But anyway, this episode, we are going to do a deep dive into Jansenism. What is Jansenism? And we're going to talk about how Jansenism left a legacy not only on the Christian culture of Europe, but also in the political culture, and how Jansenism paved way and was part of the culture that eventually resulted in the French Revolution, and the supernatural shit with it, because it's fucking supernatural as fuck. It's some wild stuff, and I can't wait. So let's get into it. So what is Jansenism, you ask? I had never heard of it, honestly, until I was rereading The Holographic Universe, and they talked about some of the supernatural occurrences that started happening. But Jansenism was a theological movement within Catholicism. It originated in the 17th century. So the 17th century would be the 1600s. Just, I have to say that out loud. I don't know if that helps you. It helps me because, yeah, I don't know. I guess some people all act like we all know that, but sometimes I just need that reminder. I say it to myself every time I hear whatever century. Okay. So Jansenism is based on the teachings of a man named Cornelius Jansen. And okay, pause. If he was Dutch, his name was probably Cornelius Jansen, right? I feel like it is Jansenism. This is just like an intuition thing, but in English, it's Jansenism, so we're just going to roll with that because I'm speaking English, so let's move on. Okay, so Cornelius Jansen was a Dutch theologian. And just theology is essentially like the study of spirituality academically, just in a nutshell. And so this man who was a theologian would publish works, and really like his writings that were kind of derivative of Catholicism focused on original sin, human depravity, and the necessity of divine grace and predestination, aligning with certain aspects of St. Augustine's teachings. So in a nutshell, he was kind of a simplistic believer in the Bible and believed that, humans were born depraved and born with sin, and that only divine grace could relieve you of that. But the aspect of St. Augustine that I find interesting, and the aspect of Jansenism that was radical at the time, was that Cornelius Jansen preached that it was important to have a personal connection with God, and that you paying tribute to the Vatican was not necessary, and that it was more important for you to have a personal relationship with God. And if anything, you would pay your respects or your taxes to your local church and community, which honestly I love that. I kind of prefer that vibe, especially because in my opinion, I do think the Vatican is its own government and has co-opted Christianity to control people. And really, that's what a lot of Jansenism is about. And that's what we're going to kind of uncover. As you can imagine, the Vatican denounced Jansenism and couldn't fucking stand it. And really, this was, at the time, a radical movement. And again, this man who started it was starting this in the 1600s. And this was a radical thing at the time, to consider yourself a Catholic and to say, I do not have the Vatican as my highest authority. My highest authority with God is my relationship with God. Radical, and honestly, chef's kiss. Love you, Cornelius. So Cornelius Jansen was a bishop, and he was deeply influenced by St. Augustine's writing. And really, the aspect of St. Augustine's writing that really captivated him was writings about grace and salvation. And really, Cornelius Jansen, as well as St. Augustine, critiqued the perceived laxity of Catholic moral theology, and they stressed the need for divine grace and salvation. Again, they're really focusing on asking for salvation from God and not asking the Vatican for personal salvation, which makes sense. I mean, we're academically, right? If you read the Bible and believe in God, your relationship with God would be the most important covenant, right? Versus a church in Rome, right? Just academically speaking, okay? Anyway, so Jansenism, sorry, pardon me. I'm if you can't tell, I am so excited about this. I'm telling you, this type of stuff really gets me going. It's like a hot cup of coffee. It's like an iced cup of coffee. Okay, so Jansenism spread and gained traction primarily in France, interestingly, and particularly among clergy and intellectuals, most notably at the Abbey of of Port Royal near Paris. And this makes sense to me, right? Intellectuals and clergy members who are actually reading the scriptures would totally have identified with these teachings because they are reading the scriptures and interpreting the scriptures intellectually. And I'm sure we're finding a whole bunch of problematic issues with the Vatican. That kind of can go unsaid. And so, key supporters of this movement include famous theologians such as Jean Duvergier, du Oron, and this was basically an abbot of a French church, and a man named Blaise Pascal. I didn't really do a deep dive into these men, and if you want to, please do, but this is just, there's so much information to cover, so we're whipping through it because I want to get you to the meat. I want to get to the meat, boy. Okay, so as you can imagine, as I've already touched on, and as you are already thinking in your smart little brain, the Catholic Church did not like this movement one bit. Jansenism was officially condemned as heretical by Pope Urban VIII in 1642, and again by subsequent popes, including Pope Innocent X and Pope Clement XI. They were not having it. I mean, obviously, this is kind of to be expected anyway. The Vatican, like a tyrannical government, will not take any person undermining their authority. And again, I just want to say, right here, I know, I don't know. I'm very opinionated, and I know sometimes when I get fired up, I don't want to be condemning. I am not against spirituality, and I love spirituality. I'm just very skeptical of any religious order because I notice it preys upon exploiting people for money and for power, and that is not what any spirituality is about. Truly, and including Christianity. And so I'm sad that the teachings of a quote-unquote prophet, whether you believe he is or not, teachings of a man became conflated to control people, both with their beliefs and with their finances. And it's fascinating because if you can control people's beliefs, you can actually control reality to a certain extent. And it is sad to me how much of these teachings, which are based in radical acceptance and compassion, have been tainted to bigotry and oppression. That is so sad to me. So I'm just saying that because I don't really want to be sitting here condemning people, but I think that we should all be questioning any religious authority, and I think the Vatican is an easy structure to look at because it's so famous and has been around for so long and has such a widespread chokehold on countries around the world, specifically countries that were colonized by European countries. Okay. The peppers are barking. They're like, preach. Thank you, peppers. Okay, so key beliefs of Jansenism. I mentioned of these a little bit before: original sin and human nature, right? I mean, this is like the classic self-loathing Catholic ideals. Do we have to close the window? Okay, you know what? Let's take a break. I'm going to close the window so that the peppers aren't so loud. Love you. 1 second. Hello, we're coming at you live from the Pepper World headquarters. It's 2025, baby. It's 2025. This is your reminder to follow your dreams. This is your reminder to get creative. This is your life. You are only going to be this version of you for a one-time only offer, one-time only situation. Live it up, babe. Live it up. I believe in you. You can do this. And the sky is the limit. I'm so excited for you. Sometimes the hardest part of the creative process is judging ourselves and stopping ourselves before we even start because of whatever, because we think, I'll never make it, or I'm not good enough, whatever. No master was born a master. Every single master of music, of painting, of dance, of architecture, whatever, spent years, decades cultivating those things. And there's only one you in the whole world, and there will only ever be one of you. So take it to the bank, baby. Believe in yourself. It might take time. It might not happen overnight, but you can actually do this. I'm telling you, and you know that it's true. You can do this. 2025, believe in yourself, baby. And we're back. Window is closed and we are sweating bullets, and I do this just for you. Love you. Okay, key beliefs of Jansenism. Really revolves around original sin and human nature. We all know the drill, classic Catholicism. Essentially, human nature is believed to be deeply corrupted by original sin, and without the divine grace of God, humans are incapable of doing good or attaining salvation. A little bit extreme in my opinion, but let's roll with it. So, of course, divine grace and salvation depend entirely by God's grace and not human effort. Grace is irresistible and granted only to the elect, emphasizing predestination. So basically, like, God will choose you, and that's God's prerogative. And there's nothing that you can do that will necessarily negate or ensure that you will receive God's grace. And then, of course, they believed in moral rigorism. So they had a strict moral discipline and asceticism, which were essential to their beliefs. So they were very bare bones, monk-like, renouncing possessions, and so on and so forth. And interestingly, the Jansenists were critical to the Jesuits, and they accused them of promoting lax moral theology, mostly through their concept of probabilism. Wait, hold on. I actually forgot to... I really want to define probabilism, because that's one of those words that I only know through context and not through the exact definition. So, probabilism is a theory that states that when certainty is not possible, plausibility or truth likeness is the best criterion. Interesting. So, got it. So basically, in a nutshell, the Jansenist believes that the Jesuits were just a little bit too lax and they made too many assumptions for things they couldn't be sure about. So as you can see here, in a way, you could argue that Jansenists are like what Catholics wish they were. They're a little bit more militant, a little more simple, a little bit more litigious to the scripture and simplicity, which I can respect. And if you're going to follow the scriptures, baby. That's all I'm going to say. And there was also some criticism of the sacraments, and I think this is why, the Vatican couldn't take it. Jansenists advocated for infrequent reception of the Eucharist, believing it required rigorous preparation and purity. They opposed what they saw as overuse or misuse of confession. And I also find this interesting, meaning that they really believed in intention. Anytime there was to be a fast or a confession, to really do it with intention and not to be going through the motions. And ultimately, I can get down with this. I really understand what they're saying theologically. They're kind of saying, let's be more intentional about our religion that we are following like it's our job. Radical. So let's just learn a little bit more about what was happening in this era, right? This movement, Jansenism, was born in the mid 1600s and then gained momentum throughout the 1700s. And so I'm just going to give you some broader context of this era so you can really understand what's happening geopolitically. And specifically, we're focusing on France mostly because this is where Jansenism really took off. So during this time, during the 17th century, there was a lot of religious conflicts. Europe was still dealing with the aftermath of the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. And actually, I did touch on this a little bit in an episode I have about the devils or the possessions of Loudun. And this was a time in France where there was a Protestant movement that was coming up, and there was essentially like small genocides happening throughout the French countryside to keep the Protestants suppressed. And this was also the tail end of the bubonic plague. And so there was just a lot of like interesting tensions between village culture and culture of the capital, which of course is like culture of the king, and kings finding ways to control village culture in a nutshell. So, of course, naturally, the Catholic Church sought to reassert its authority, while movements like Gallicanism and Jansenism resisted. And I'm going to get into Gallicanism in 1 second, but I also find that movement really interesting. And in a nutshell, the Catholic Church is a government. In a sense, it is the Pope is a king to a certain extent, or the Emperor of Rome, arguably. So this was a time where there was a lot of tension between the papacy, the kings of different countries of Europe, and then the villages and the beliefs of the people in those villages. Also, there was a big kind of conflict between absolutism and nation state. So really what I mean is that there was monarchs. A great example would be Louis XIV of France. He sought to consolidate power, and this was often clashing with the church, which had traditionally wielded significant influence, right? So like it's kind of like a layered conflict, because the papacy wants full power. The king of said country, we're talking about France right now, the king of France wants full power. And then, of course, the local clergy and villages are having their own beliefs. And so it's like, which overlord, which big boss is going to win in controlling the beliefs of the locals? This is so fascinating too, like not to go on a full side tangent, but part of why I find this subject so interesting is because I obviously grew up in the United States, and there is this part of is it the Constitution? Sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's in our Constitution. There is a phrase that is a big part of the American ideology, that there is a separation between church and state. And obviously, I think that there should be a separation of church and state. However, I don't think it's actually possible, specifically with Christianity, and specifically with the type of Christianity that is practiced in the United States, because Christianity in the United States was brought over by Europeans, and the Christianity that they practice was taught to them by the Catholic Church. And of course, then it would branch out. There was Anglicans and Protestants and whatever, right? There are so many branches of Christianity through Western Europe. But they all became co-opted by the papacy, which was developed to control people as a government. So I do think it's really interesting, this concept of separation of church and state from the lens of the American culture. Because I don't think a lot of us, I'll just speak for myself. I don't think I was ever educated growing up how much nuance there was about the papacy, the Roman Church, and how it began, and also the religious history of Europe and the religious history that is interwoven in the government history. There wasn't ever really a separation of church and state. So this ideal to separate them now is a beautiful idea, but I truly don't know if it is possible, because the people who practice Christianity are actually worshiping a government, and that government is the Vatican. Right? Maybe I'm wrong. If you think I'm wrong, email in esotericanonsense@gmail.com. Or if you have your own personal story about Christianity, France, literally whatever, write in esotericanonsense@gmail.com. And with your permission, I will read your story on the podcast. Literally anything. Okay, so I'm getting off topic. So during this time, we are in the 17th century, we're in France, and Western Europe, really, and tensions are rising. And what I mentioned earlier is Protestantism. And Protestantism, in bare bones, damn it, my mouth can't wrap around this. Protestantism was really a movement about stripping down Christianity to its bare bones and letting go of all the lavishness of Catholicism, letting go of all the gold, letting go of all the embroidered robes. These were the people, the pilgrims that came to the United States. They were people that were adopting a very simplistic lifestyle because that is what they believed the scriptures were preaching. And tensions were rising in Western Europe during the 17th and 18th century. Protestant powers, such as England and the Dutch Republic, often supported movements that weakened Catholic unity, obviously because that benefited the king of that nation if the people showed more allegiance to the king than they did to the Vatican. Indirectly, this bolstered the Gallicanism movement and similar efforts to decentralize papal power. This also caused a lot of philosophical shifts. The Enlightenment thinkers questioned traditional authorities, including both monarchs and the Pope, fostering an intellectual climate that weakened Gallicanism's religious foundation. Boom! Think about this. These movements, which question the Catholic Church, run hand in hand with the Enlightenment period. This period that I find so many white scholars obsess over, the Enlightenment period, quote unquote, of Europe. It's kind of embarrassing because the rest of the world, especially the Arab world, in Asia, even in the Americas, these people were highly advanced and much more cleanly. But anyway, the Enlightenment period of Europe we think of as mostly philosophical, scientific, art, poetry, but there was an aspect of this that is religious. People were questioning the Catholic Church, and that was truly radical. And we need to make space for that, okay? So, during this time, the major controversies and criticism really revolved around the Jansenist opposition from the Jesuits, which I touched on. And the Jesuits could not stand the Jansenists. They just thought they were full of shit. They accused them of being too similar to Calvinism, mostly because they kept talking about predestination, this idea that no matter how good you are, God may not save you, and it's really kind of up to God. It's almost like this destiny idea. And officially, even though the papacy deemed Jansenism heretical, meaning against the church in 1642, they released a writing known as the Papal Bull Unigenitus, which was written in 1713. Oh, which is even earlier, I realized. And this caused significant divisions in the French church, as many Jansenist supporters refused to accept this. And I'll expand on what this was, the Papal Bull, and it was essentially like a press release, if you will, or a doctrine that the papacy released, which was kind of making clear who was right, who was wrong, and they deeply condemned Jansenism. And it also deeply condemned Gallicanism, and the two movements became intertwined because both of these movements reduced papal authority in favor of local and national church autonomies. And even the French monarchy viewed the Jansenists as politically subversive. And I think that is important. Even though the French monarchy did want its local authority, they wanted it to be focused in the capital of the monarchy, obviously. And in a way, the Jansenists were feared because they were a movement that could theoretically have people thinking for themselves. And that is dangerous, especially in a monarchy. Okay, so before I touch on Gallicanism, I am going to talk about this publication, this writing that the papacy released, and it's known as the Papal Bull of Unigenitus, released in 1713. So essentially, Pope Clement XI issued this papal bull, and this condemned the 101 propositions taken from the works of the Jansenist theologian Pasquier Quesnel, particularly from his books known as Réflexions morales, moral reflections. Unigenitus was a direct attack on Jansenism, targeting its views on grace, free will, and the role of the sacraments. This publication led to the widespread resistance in France, especially among Jansenist sympathizers, creating a theological crisis, right? So, at this point, all of these people now are questioning the papacy and pulling back. And this led to a growing papal authority known as ultramontanism. The Vatican sought to centralize and strengthen its authority over national churches, a proposition opposed by Gallicanism in France. The suppression of Jansenism was part of the broader ultramontanist effort to assert papal control over doctrine and suppressed regional variations in theology. This is really just like getting me going. I wish this is the kind of stuff they taught us in school, you know? And so as you can imagine, like, I'm just kind of giving you this context of what's happening at the time in France, because this is all kind of setting the stage for not only the Enlightenment movement, but also the French Revolution. There's tension between the Vatican and the monarchy, between the monarchy and the nationalized churches, and between the Vatican and the national churches. And there's this movement of people questioning authority. And this is powerful. Questioning authority is so powerful. Never let us forget this. Okay, so let's talk about Gallicanism a little bit, because I know I've mentioned it quite a bit. And let's get deep into that. But before, let's take a little break. Hello, dear peppers. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear your ghost stories, the fairy tales you heard growing up, the weird visions that you've had, lucid dreams, nightmares, freaky deaky stuff. Please email in at esotericaandnonsense@gmail.com. And if you're comfortable, I will read your story on the podcast. If you are a fan, I would love to invite you to check out my online store. The link is in my show notes. I have merchandise for the podcast. There's tumblers, there's sweatshirts, there's t-shirts, as well as a whole bunch of other original art of mine that I am selling. Thank you so much. And if you are a Gold Star fan, you can check me out on Patreon. Every monthly donation helps me tremendously as I am doing this show solo, baby. Stay hydrated. Love you. Okay, so what is Gallicanism, my friends? The key tenets of Gallicanism were, 1, the autonomy of national churches. And again, this smells a lot like Jansenism, right? The French church should have significant independence from the Pope in administrative, legal, and doctrinal matters, right? Obviously, the Vatican hated this. Number 2, the royal authority in church affairs. Gallicanism believed that the king, not the Pope, had supreme authority over the temporal aspects of the church within France. They also believed that bishops and clergy were subject to royal oversight in many areas, including appointments. Number 3, Gallicanism believed that there was limits on papal infallibility, meaning that the Pope's decisions were not seen as absolute. They required the approval of the ecumenical councils or local bishops to have full effect. Ooh, you can just feel it. The Pope obviously hated this. And number 4, the Gallicanists believe they had a belief in opposition to ultramontanism, this idea which advocated for strong papal authority. So they were not for this idea of this like one leader of Christianity and that there could be localized leaders. It is actually pretty radical. So interestingly, there are medieval roots of Gallicanism. Gallicanism traces its roots to conflicts between the papacy and the European monarchs during the Middle Ages, such as the investiture controversy and the Avian papacy. Now I'm just kind of like, there's like so much to talk about. And so like, I don't want to like make this a 4-hour podcast, but in a nutshell, this movement of Gallicanism started much earlier. It started in the Middle Ages. And again, this is kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, it makes total sense, right? The Pope, in a lot of ways, wants to be seen as king of Christianity. And in a way, like, the Pope wanted to have more power than kings. And kings hated that. And that's like, it's really just a battle of egos of men, right? And that's like, what's the word I'm looking for? It sounds about white. We all know how men can be in positions of power and how they react and interact with each other. So Gallicanism was really born of the conflicts of male egos, of Pope, local clergy, and monarchs. So, into the 17th and 18th century, Gallicanism reached its peak, influenced by the broader political and religious developments. So really what was happening is that as Louis XIV became king, he was really trying to create an absolute monarchy. Louis XIV was known as the Sun King, and Gallicanism became a key part of his effort to centralize power. He believed in the divine right of kings and saw the Pope as a potential rival to his authority. So of course, even though Gallicanism was born in the Middle Ages, once a king started backing it, that's when it really grew popularity. And so to be clear, Gallicanism was condemned by the Vatican, by the Pope, as well as Jansenism, right? So Jansenism and Gallicanism were both equally heretical according to the papacy. However, according to the French monarchy, Gallicanism was A-okay, right? Because Gallicanism was advocating for the king being in charge of church affairs, whereas Jansenism was not. And that's an important distinction here, right? And like this is like where we're seeing the difference between the conflict between local clergy and the Vatican versus local clergy and the monarch, right? So that it's almost like this love triangle of a battle of egos, if you will. Okay, blah, blah, blah. There's all this like stuff with Gallicanism. I want to like stay on track because technically what I really want to get into is in the supernatural stories of Jansenism. But in a nutshell, I just want to mention the legacy that Gallicanism had. And it really influenced national churches. It influenced similar movements in other Catholic countries, such as Febronianism in Germany, which I've actually never heard of. Maybe we should do an episode on that. And of course, we all know about how the English church eventually seceded from the Catholic Church. And really this idea of stoking the interest of kings to take autonomy from the papacy and really kind of owning their own authority. But eventually, as time went on into the 19th century, a pope named Pope Pius IX marked the decline of Gallicanism as he created the Declaration of Papal Infallibility. And really basically this man, Pope Pius IX, really kind of brought this authority back and reclaimed his authority as the ultimate king of Catholicism. Okay, so let's skip forward. I kind of overdid it on my notes, and I feel like I really did too much. So now I want to talk about François de Paris. And this was the man who, he did not start Jansenism, but he became, he was a clergyman who really wrote and expanded upon its beliefs and got more followers. So this man, François de Paris, was born in Paris around the year 1690 to a wealthy and noble family. Despite his privileged background, he showed early signs of rejecting wealth and comfort in favor of a devout ascetic lifestyle. He studied theology at the Sorbonne, where he was influenced by the ideas of Jansenism and its emphasis on divine grace, human sinfulness, and moral rigorism. He was ordained as a deacon, and he chose not to advance in the priesthood, believing himself unworthy, a decision consistent with Jansenist humility and self-abasement. Oh my God, dude. A Catholic Reformationist, it's a lot, if you know what I mean. It really is. He really believed in living a life of poverty and charity. He renounced his inheritance and wealth, choosing instead to live among the poor in the Faubourg Saint-Marcel, which was a working class district of Paris. He gave away his possessions and he lived a life of extreme poverty, often relying on donations and alms. He was deeply involved in acts of charity, helping the sick and the destitute while emphasizing their spiritual welfare. And to his credit, this is more in line with the teachings of Jesus. Like, I have to give him some credit. You know, it doesn't necessarily sound like fun. I'm not getting like the vibe that he's like a fun time. And I do get that vibe from Jesus. I do get the vibe that Jesus, aka Yeshua, Golden Boy, I get the vibe that he was like smoking weed, right? I'm not getting this vibe from François, but I will give him some credit that this seems more in line with what Jesus was really talking about, which was like not worrying about material wealth and truly being charitable. So François became a staunch defender of Jansenism and its theology. Particularly, he challenged this publication, the papal bull of Unigenitus. And obviously, as we mentioned earlier, this papal publication condemned the Jansenist movement and all of their doctrines. François refused to accept the papal bull and openly opposed its supporters, including many bishops and high-ranked clergy in France. His resistance made him a symbol of the Jansenist cause, particularly after his death. Respect. So, François de Paris' spiritual life was characterized by extreme asceticism, which reflected his deep commitment to Jansenist principles. Reminder that asceticism really means like a monk lifestyle, renouncing worldly possessions, living simplistically, living in caves, like that kind of shit, right? So this is like some pretty intense stuff, but François subjected himself to harsh physical penances, including wearing hair shirts. I don't really know what they mean by that, like human hair shirts, horse hair shirts, like probably not like cashmere or mohair, right? Like probably a hair that's scratchy. But anyway, he would do small self-torture by wearing, quote, hair shirts, sleeping on bare boards or the dirty floor, and he would fast frequently. These practices were meant to atone for his sin and imitate the sufferings of Christ. I just love like the hair shirt aspect. Like, I will need to wear the hair shirt so that I can imitate the sufferings of Christ. I just love that. So he also had a deep devotion to prayer and contemplation. Francois spent long hours in prayer, often meditating on the themes of divine grace, human sinfulness, and the passion of Christ. And I do want to mention, honorable mention to Hinduism right now. This does remind me of the story I heard of Kali, and my friend who told it to me kind of like threw out this phrase where he was like, in India, we all know that if a person meditates for long enough, the gods will grant them with a single boon or like a single wish. And so I just kind of want to mention that because Francois was meditating quite a bit. And, you know, as we'll get to in a second, after he died, he allegedly was like granting all these miraculous miracles and in a way became this like religious giant or spiritual giant. So anyway, Francois' prayer life emphasized humility and total dependence on God's grace, and he really believed in sacramental rigidity. He advocated for strict preparation before receiving the sacraments, particularly the Eucharist. And he frequently confessed his sins, emphasizing personal accountability before God. And charity was the cornerstone of his spirituality. And I do respect that because that is really what Christianity preaches. He viewed acts of charity as both moral obligation and a way to live out the gospel of Christ. And I have to agree with him. That's what the gospel says, baby. That is what the gospel says. He integrated his care for the poor with his theological convictions, often using his interactions as opportunity for I don't know this word. Catechesis. Wait, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. Damn it, I actually looked this word up earlier because I was like, I'm going to act like I know this word. I don't know this word. And this is a reminder that we don't know every word. Even if we speak a language, we don't necessarily know the word. Okay, I don't even know how to say this. Catechesis. Catechesis. This is a Christian religious education that teaches the fundamentals of faith to children and adults. Okay. So, kind of like the what do you call it? Like religious instruction, almost like Sunday school.
Catechesis.
Ooh, sorry, was that loud? Catechesis. Okay. That doesn't sound right. But anyway, sorry. So we just learned a word together. And anyway, really what I'm getting at is that Francois believed that caring for the poor was his Sunday school, if you will. That those were his ways to learn of the Christian doctrine. So let's get to the interesting part. Let's get to the part we all signed up for. I'm so excited. Good evening, my peppers. Do you ever sit and wonder, how can I help the world? Things sometimes feel like they're going to shit. The world feels like it's on fire. What can we do? Well, I have a small act of kindness in mind. Our planet is a plant kingdom planet. The plants are the basis of all life. Plants have allowed living organisms to thrive. Why not plant some more plants? Now, maybe you don't know very much, you say. Annabelle, I don't know very much about plants. That's totally okay. Perhaps start with a succulent. Most succulents barely need water, maybe once a month. And honestly, they do best with little to no water. Also, you can propagate more succulents from single leaves. I highly recommend an agave. Agave is incredible. It's easy, it's low maintenance, and you can use it for face masks. Maybe, perhaps, you live in a house or you have a property where you can plant a tree. Even something simple like a lemon tree. If every human being planted one tree tomorrow, that would be almost 8 billion more trees on planet Earth. With more trees, that is more housing and food for animals. It is more oxygen for us to breathe. We live symbiotically with plants. So, plant a little plant. So, let's talk about the death and legacy of Francois de Paris. So, as he lived, he did gain a lot of traction and really kind of became the living figurehead of the Jansenist movement. And he died fairly young, only at the age 37 in the year 1727. Likely due to the physical toll of his ascetic lifestyle and how little he ate and how hard he was on his body. But his death was seen as the culmination of a life lived in total devotion to God. He left a legacy as a martyr of the Jansenist movement. And after his death, Jansenists elevated Francois as a symbol of their resistance to papal authority and the French monarchy's control of the church. So he was buried in the cemetery of Saint-Médard, or I guess with an American accent, Saint Medard. And I actually looked into it. Sadly, this cemetery is not like an active cemetery to this day. A lot of it has kind of been like dismantled and I think built over or like repurposed. But at the time, this was a functioning cemetery, and this cemetery became a pilgrimage site where Jansenists would visit and reported miracles. So, it's just so interesting. So the miracles were one thing, and then there was also a group of people like known as the convulsionaries, and like this is kind of like your classic like speaking in tongues situation, but people started visiting his graves in huge numbers, and they were claiming to have miraculous healings or to start like convulsing, I guess like almost having epileptic fits. So during his life, Francois did not claim to have miraculous powers. However, after his death and the things that were seen at his tomb, this became evidence to Jansenists the sanctity and God's approval of Jansenism. And this became a controversy, and the controversy surrounding these miracles intensified the divisions within the church and attracted scrutiny from both religious and secular authorities. So, let's get into the miracles. Ooh! These, and I did touch on this in my last episode, but these were like huge news at the time. People were talking about this for like over 100 years. So there was numerous healings that were recorded. Individuals claimed to have been cured from chronic illnesses by visiting the tomb of Francois de Paris, including paralysis, blindness, cancer. There are testimonies that were meticulously recorded, often with medical details, which supported the claims of these individuals. There was also reports of ecstatic states of convulsion. Some pilgrims who came to the tomb experienced convulsive fits, trances, or ecstatic states at the site. These individuals became known as convulsionaries, and they often displayed extraordinary phenomena such as speaking in tongues or prophesying, surviving extreme physical trials without harm, such as being struck or pierced. And these convulsionaries became a hallmark of the miracle movement and were both celebrated and ridiculed. And there also is an alleged account of an entire street of people outside the cemetery all convulsing at the same time. There was also supernatural signs around the cemetery. There was accounts of glowing lights and orbs, unusual weather phenomenon, and other inexplicable occurrences near the tomb. Oh my God, this is so cool! Was Francois an alien? So let's get some details. I'm going to give you receipts. One of the most famous healings was the healing of a woman known as Marianne de Bazanville. whatever, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Marianne. This happened in 1727. She was suffering from a debilitating illness that left her partially paralyzed and bedridden. She visited the tomb and reportedly experienced an instantaneous recovery. Witnesses claimed she walked away unaided, praising God for her healing. Another woman, who was named Marguerite Thibault in 1731, she was a young woman afflicted with gangrene in her leg, meaning her leg was rotting away, and she prayed fervently at Francois' tomb. Allegedly, her leg reportedly healed overnight with no medical explanation. The event was witnessed by a crowd of pilgrims and documented by observers. And then a woman named Catherine Vignal in 1732, she was suffering from severe epilepsy. Catherine visited the tomb and fell into an ecstatic state during a convulsive episode. Afterwards, she was free from her seizures, which she attributed to the intercession of Francois. What? So, what's so interesting historically is the unique and controversial aspect of the miracles. And this was the convulsionaries, the people that were having convulsions and trances. This phenomenon was so widespread at the tomb of Francois that the individuals became known as the convulsionaries. And this became a coined term in France and Greater Europe. They would have physical convulsions, like I said. They were having violent contortions. They would roll on the ground. They would even enter rigid trance-like states. They would often emerge unharmed. And they were known to go through these extreme physical tests, like being pierced by rods, or walking on hot coals, or being burnt. And this became the most famous aspect of the tomb of Francois. The people who were known as the convulsionaries often claimed to receive divine messages or prophetic insights during their trances. They often spoke in tongues or recited scripture with fervor, attracting large crowds to witness these events. And like I mentioned, these glowing orbs and lights became super popular. And there was alleged moments where people would talk about localized storms over the tomb where the rest of the cemetery would have no rain. There would be orb lights circling his tomb, and there was also anecdotal reports mentioning miraculous events involving animals, such as sick livestock being healed. And as you can imagine, the papacy was pissed hearing about this, as was the King of France. Oh, how cool is this story? I think this story is so interesting. Even if this was just a culty thing that maybe wasn't true, but again, the orbs of light, this is pretty wild. And even if it was a gag and they were just fucking around, they ate with that because the papacy got so fucking angry. And interestingly, this whole movement really created more tension politically in France. The supporters of Jansenism recorded the details of these miracles. They had names, they had dates, and part of why they were recorded so intentionally was because how many counter accusations of fraud that they had. And interestingly, the papacy did send out clergy members to go to France and watch this, and they did confirm that they saw it. But the papacy rebranded this as the work of the devil. That's how they handled this. That's how the PR team handled this. They were like, this happened, this is real, but it's devil's work. And I'm just saying, if the papacy said that it happened, it fucking happened. I'm sorry, this is wild. So this did create more political tensions, and it really did create more skepticism and church opposition. The Catholic Church, particularly under the papal and royal pressure, dismissed the miracles out of nervousness because they really didn't want people to start questioning the papacy. And local bishops were initiating investigations, really hoping to have the public not believe in these phenomenon. And so what started happening is the Jansenists were kind of gaining steam. They saw this as proof that their beliefs were true and that God favored them. But this also created resentment within the Catholic hierarchy and really started leaning into the idea that Jansenists were actually promoting and participating in demonic activity. And there was even critics within the French society, including government officials, obviously the king himself, and even some people who were still practicing Catholics found this to be disruptive and delinquent for people to be visiting the cemetery, especially at night. It eventually became illegal for these people to visit the cemetery, and so they would often visit in secret during the nighttime. And in the Enlightenment circles of the philosophers of the time in France, a big name being Voltaire, he mocked the phenomenon of the Jansenists as irrational and emblematic of religious superstition. And like I said, this really led to a government suppression in 1732 because crowds at the cemetery were growing so big that King Louis XV ordered the cemetery to be closed, famously stating that by royal decree we forbid God from performing any more miracles in this place. Meaning that Louis XV had the audacity to forbid God from performing miracles. That's wild. That's fucking wild. And granted, I just want to bring up that Louis XV was the father of Louis XVI, and Louis XVI was the king that was beheaded during the French Revolution with, of course, our girl Marie Antoinette. So I just really want to plant that seed that this is part of the social and political religious climate that was leading up to the French Revolution. Right? Jansenism, who fucking knew? I didn't know. Another fun fact that I wanted to mention is there was talk of alleged ghosts that were sighted around the tomb of Francois. Specifically, there was a grave known as the Weeping Grave, and legends hold that one of the graves near Francois's tomb would mysteriously produce tears, small droplets of water that people believed were miraculous. The phenomenon was later dismissed as natural condensation, but it added to the cemetery's mystique. Also, sometimes locals reported hearing wailing and chanting near the cemetery long after it was abandoned. There was also a tombstone known as the Cursed Tombstone, and there was a story that told of a gravestone that supposedly caused bad luck to anyone who touched it. Some Jansenists believe that this was a result of a curse placed to protect François de Paris and other Jansenists who would visit the cemetery. Who knows? So, the legacy of these miracles did last and made a big impact on Jansenism, but also the political climate of France. These miracles deepened divisions within the Catholic Church and the Jansenist movement, and a mystical dimension that further set it apart from mainstream Catholicism, right? Jansenism is now becoming more and more estranged from Catholicism and really diving back into the mysticism and the magic. And ultimately, the idea of the convulsionaries and the people speaking in tongues and all of that is really what alienated most modern Jansenists from continuing to practice it. I think that's it's kind of the megachurch vibe. It really I think it pushed people away. But it really led during the Enlightenment period, this led to debates on supernatural phenomenon. The events around the tomb of Francois fueled debates and philosophical conversations about the nature of miracles and the role of God in everyday life. They were cited by both sides in the broader Enlightenment era arguments about faith, science, and superstition. Some modern interpretations is that today, some historians and psychologists have studied this phenomenon of the convulsionaries as a case of mass hysteria, religious fervor, and social rebellion. And that doesn't surprise me because in our modern day, we really have put less and less belief into things like mysticism and really like come at everything from a perspective of like it can be explained with logical thinking. But who's to say? Like maybe there was really religious miracles happening, spiritual miracles, I should say. Who I wasn't there. Were you there? So this is where it gets really interesting. I mean, I think it's already pretty interesting, don't you? But after these miracles started happening and becoming widespread, the Vatican obviously intensified its efforts to root out Jansenist supporters, using the Congregation of the Holy Office, aka the Inquisition, to investigate suspected heretics. Bishops who refused to enforce unigenitus faced censure or removal. Attempts to control the narrative as well, the papal envoys and clergy in France worked to counter the Jansenist narrative, portraying the miracles as fantastical and undermining the credibility. This is kind of where the Vatican and the King of France, Louis XV, did align because they both wanted the Jansenist gone. And really, the long-term impact of the Vatican's behavior led to increased centralization. Because of the suppression of the Jansenist movement, this marked a significant step towards the centralization of papal authority, culminating in the doctrine of papal infallibility at the First Vatican Council. And really, this led to a more strained relationship with France. The Jansenist controversy left a legacy of distrust between the Vatican and the French Church, which persisted into the 19th century. There was a polarization within Catholicism at this point. The Vatican's rejection of Jansenism alienated many devout Catholics who desired greater moral and theological rigor. This polarization laid the groundwork for later reformist movements both within and outside the church. And ultimately, this led to religious tensions, and this religious tension was deeply a part of the eventual French Revolution. What? Come on, people! Come on! This is your daily reminder that you are pure magic, and the world around you is magic. Don't forget to enjoy, take advantage of it. Did you know that there have been studies that our thoughts and words can change the molecules around us? A Japanese scientist did a study where he spoke to water and froze it. Some of the water he told, "I love you," whereas other water he would say, "I hate you." And after he froze these containers of water, he found that the molecular structure had changed. And essentially, the water that he had said, "I love you" to became an incredible patchwork of sacred geometry, organized, gorgeous, architecturally incredible. Whereas the ones that he said, "I hate you" to had a chaotic structure. This is your reminder to be kind to yourself. Your body is something like 70-80% water. So the things that you say to yourself, the things that you say out loud, truly change reality. You are incredible. Forget not. So, ultimately, we kind of already can see where this is going. Because of the Jansenist movement, it created discord between the papacy and Jansenism. But also, Jansenism created discord between the monarchy. And while this was all happening, there was also Gallicanism, which the monarchy was supporting, but the Vatican wasn't, as well as philosophers and Enlightenment thinkers. And because all of these movements were in direct contrast with each other, it really started to debase where people left their allegiance of beliefs. And usually what the papacy would do was put out doctrine and information to counteract things like Enlightenment movements and to really keep people loyal to the beliefs of the papacy. But really what was happening in France is all these counterculture movements were creating a more diverse soup and ultimately creating a culture of questioning authority. And I think that's really important to remember. Like, this is like 100, 200 year period where it became more normal for people to question authority. Obviously, religious people were questioning the authority of the church or the king, but also people, intellectuals and philosophers were questioning the beliefs of the king and the papacy. And I think that this is such an important concept and a thing that we need to contextualize about this time period and how it eventually led to the French Revolution. Because leading up to the French Revolution, there was almost 200 years of people beginning to just question things. And I really do think that is such a powerful sentiment. And so all of these movements really created more schisms within French culture. There was the Gallicanism movement that was kind of toying between nationalism and religion. There was the Jansenist movement that was kind of understanding the difference between like localized spirituality versus ultramonism, the idea of having like one supreme ruler of religion. And there was also the Jesuits that were kind of toying between the idea of quietism and mysticism, the difference between the emphasis on passiveness or the emphasis on the mystical union with God. And while this is all happening, philosophers and artists are going through the Enlightenment period. And this Enlightenment period really was about a criticism of the church. Enlightenment thinkers such as Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, they criticized the Catholic Church for its perceived corruption, dogmatism, and alliance with absolutist monarchies. The church's role in suppressing movements like Jansenism and quietism made it a target for those advocating reason, liberty, and individualism. This led to the reason versus faith debate. The Enlightenment period elevated reason and scientific inquiry over religious doctrine, which challenged the traditional Christian beliefs. The philosopher Voltaire mocked the miracles of the Jansenists at the tomb of Francois, but he also was mocking Catholicism a lot of the time. There was a huge anti-clerical sentiment that was beginning to grow in France. The church's wealth, privilege, and perceived oppression of dissent fueled resentment among the middle and lower class. And I think this is so important because as they started questioning the privilege of the papacy, they also began to question the privilege of the monarchy. This is huge. Ultimately, the religious tensions in France weakened the authority of the church. This left the social structure of France to be quite fragmented and vulnerable. By the time of the French Revolution, the church had lost much of its moral and spiritual authority in the eyes of the French people. There began to also be anti-clerical legislation. The revolution targeted the church as a symbol of privilege and oppression. There was a civil constitution of the clergy in 1790. This stated that the nationalized church property and placed the clergy under state control. Clergy were required to swear loyalty to the revolutionary government, further dividing the church into constitutional clergy, those who compelled, and refractory clergy, which were those who resisted. And this is really interesting because this is not necessarily a separation of church and state, but this is a separation of church with the mega church being the papacy, right? And so during the revolution, they really took that into account. They were asking clergy to be loyal to the localized government and the local culture. I really do think this is so interesting. And a really big aspect of the French Revolution was a revolutionary movement of de-Christianization. There were radical people who sought to erase Catholic influence by and by. The cult of reason and later the cult of the supreme being replaced Catholic rituals with secular ceremonies. Churches were desecrated and clergy were persecuted and executed during the Reign of Terror in 1793 through 1794. Like, what? I didn't even know about any of the religious prosecution that was happening during the French Revolution. This is monumental. The Jansenist emphasis on moral rigor, individual accountability, and resistance to unjust authority resonated with revolutionary ideals. So even people who weren't necessarily Jansenists were very impacted by the culture that Jansenism created. Many revolutionaries admired the Jansenist opposition to absolutism and saw their struggle as a precursor to the fight for political liberty. Fuck yes, dude. The legacy and tensions of the post-revolutionary France really created a society based around secularization. The revolution laid the foundation for a secular French republic, with the separation of church and state formalized in the 19th century, or at least an attempted separation of church and state, right? The religious tensions continued on, especially under the reign of Napoleon and during the Restoration of France. Obviously, like I mentioned, as time went on, Jansenism began to decline, especially because through the movement of the Enlightenment, people became more and more skeptical of things such as like speaking in tongues and things that were like seemed too mystical. Obviously, like alchemy was super popular at the time and Hermeticism, but this was kind of based more on mysticism through the lens of logic and less through the lens of spirituality. And through the French Revolution, it also led to a big shift in papal authority. The Vatican lost a lot of influence over the French over the French people during this period. And it contributed to the eventual retreat from direct political involvement in national affairs. And that is something I really want you to leave with today. The Vatican has a fierce PR department. And the French Revolution did really change the global environment, because due to the French Revolution, and I think, in my opinion, the succession of the English church, I think the papacy learned an important lesson to be very strategic on how they involve themselves politically and to basically do it with more stealth. They can't appoint themselves as king, but they have to do it in a little bit more subtle and manipulative way, because now we have reached a point in history where people are not fucking having it. Kings aren't having it, and local people are not having it. And that is why I'm so excited to learn about the Jansenist movement. And I do think it's not a coincidence that I have never heard of it, and I think most people have never heard of it, because our beliefs, whether you are religious or not, whether you are spiritual or not, our beliefs shape our reality. And when people started to believe that they shouldn't be reporting to the papacy, that they shouldn't be reporting to the king, it did change the culture of their nation. It did take 150 years, almost 200 years to gain momentum, but even people who weren't even practicing Jansenists were influenced by the sphere of these beliefs, that they should question authority. And that is a very powerful sentiment. And that is something that I think we should all leave with today. Nothing has control over us except the things that we allow to have control over us. Even if we think that we have no autonomy within our own minds and within our own body, nothing can actually change your inner world and your beliefs. They can totally have power over you physically, but no one can actually change your beliefs unless you let them. And I am really inspired by this concept and this movement of Jansenism, because it really is radical for its time period. And it really did set in motion the French Revolution. And that is just so interesting. And the fact that within, the French Revolution happened in 1793 or something, right? In the 1790s, Francois de Paris died in 1727. So literally just like 63 years after this man died, the French Revolution happened. And I that's really not that much time. That is really interesting to me. And the legacy that we have on each other is really a butterfly effect. Even if you don't become famous, even if no one knows your name, the actions that you have as a person can shape the world around you, and that can catch fire. Ideas can grow, and that is powerful. Anyway, I feel like I could talk about this forever. I had so much fun doing a deep dive. I hope you had just as much fun as me. Your thoughts, opinions, and beliefs are powerful. Never forget that. Let's create a beautiful world together. I love that. I want that. I'm doing it with or without you, so you can do it or not, but I'm going to do it. Get with it. We're going to plant trees and eat fruit with our titties out. I love you so much. Over and out, baby. Happy 2025.